Welcome to Selectiva's Contract Management Webinar Series. My name is Eric Mott, Vice President of Social Business at Selectica, and I will be your moderator today. Today's session will cover contract management trends and solutions and focus on contract discovery best practices and success. Before we begin, I just want to go through a few things to help make this webinar experience a positive one for you. The webinar is being recorded for on-demand access. Attendee phone lines are muted. If you have any kind of issue with WebEx, please call the support line at 1-866-229-3239, and the prompts are number 1 for attendees. If you're on Twitter, follow us at Selectica_Inc. and Seal Software, and discuss this webinar with the Find Managed Contracts hashtag. Submit your anonymous questions via WebEx chat, and make sure you set your setting to send chat messages to both hosts and panelists. And a special thanks to you for joining us, and also our participating partners, DocuSign, Seal, and the Samadhi Group. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce the speakers to you today. Patrick Stakanis is the Chief Strategy Officer at Selectica. He has extensive experience in identifying and capitalizing on emerging trends and enterprise software process effectiveness, performance management, and cloud computing services. Patrick was most recently at Gartner, where he authored key industry research, including the Magic Quadrants for Sales Performance Management and Salesforce Automation. Patrick is on Twitter at Patrick Stakanis. Lloyd Alexander is Vice President of Contract Strategy at Seal Software, where he brings 20 years of domain expertise to help drive the overall vision and go-to-market effort for Seal Solutions. Previously, Lloyd worked as the practice executive, enterprise contract management, responsible for contract management strategy and best practices at IBM. Lloyd is on Twitter at Seal Software. And you can learn more about each speaker by clicking on their photos on the landing page where you registered for the webinar. So here's the agenda. I'm going to run through it real quickly, and then we'll get into it. So we're going to cover contract management trends and solutions, why contract migration, and we're going to touch on some migration myths, and we're going to also touch on some of the challenges that a lot of organizations experience. Contract discovery best practices will be the focus, and we're going to get into things to consider, gauging success, and even some success stories. And then we're going to close with Q&A and more resources. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Patrick. Let me just do that real quick. And bear with me just for a moment. And we're going to hand it over to Patrick. Hi, Patrick. Can you hear me?
I can.
All right. Well, you should have control.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric. Greatly appreciated and glad to be participating in the event today with Seal Software. I want to jump right into trends in contract management and things that have been discussed by Gartner and published in numerous research documents. One in particular is a recent one on global procurement advances that will drive billions of dollars in savings, and this is really all around contract management. In fact, they discuss the impact of the expansion in this space as it relates to contract management or contract lifecycle management, or as you'll often hear, contract management solutions. And in the next 3 years, they see a shifting in how risk management is managed and how discounts are managed, rebates, and obligation management. And in adopting these tools, Gartner estimates conservatively that it'll literally yield $24 billion of opportunity or savings under this new spend management approach. And that really is linking the spend or your obligations or your discounts and rebates back to the contract in an automated fashion so that it basically shows you what's occurring and what the opportunities are inside of your organization. So for those of you that work with Gartner, you can definitely access the report, and if not, please talk to us and we'll look at how you might be able to get access to that. In continuing on the trends aspect, contracts are everywhere, and we often forget as practitioners that the contracts are often the lifeblood of the organization, that they occur across sales and marketing and procurement and HR and and IT and financial service, and in fact legal is at the center of all this. Generally any contract that comes in or comes out of an organization is impacted by one of these functional groups. And if you look at some of the most obvious ones, like NDAs and customer sales contracts and policies and pricings, and of course in procurement, depending on your organization, if you have the muscle, oftentimes you'll drive your paper to the vendor, and or it may be coming in. But either way, if the contract is coming into the organization or you're pushing it out to a vendor, it's important to know that what the discounts are or the rebates or obligations, and track those, because left unattended, that's that $24 billion that we're talking about. That's that dollars that are left on the table in potentially opportunities that you could be getting with that vendor or that customer from the standpoint of managing the contract. Of course, in human resources, there's employee contracts and NDAs and non-competes and non-solicit, and the list goes on, that all needs to be tracked and managed. And oftentimes in large organizations where you have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and in some cases millions of contracts, and there's turnover inside your organization, those contracts can get left on hard drives or thumb drives or lost in a system somewhere. So it's important that you wrap the information around a contact management system or those contracts. And again, oftentimes there's an assumption that maybe legal is managing this, or legal has the information, and they may have it stored in a legal management system. But the key thing is for everyone to know where the contracts are in this endless collaboration of information, that it is resident inside of a contract management system or some system that provides you that access. So if we again look at the whole concept around contract management solutions and the fact that they're linked throughout the enterprise, they often become, or almost always become, the glue that holds together this ecosystem of information. It's the foundation of these relationships that you have out there, whether it be an employee, a customer, a vendor, or your partners, and that every function of your business is impacted by these contracts. And again, when we look at the sales organization or strategic sourcing, human resources, and IT, everybody is either outputting or inputting information on a daily basis. And again, the importance of having these contracts linked with these other systems and engaged with these other functional areas, that's where the opportunity is. That's where to be able to reach out and touch the physical aspects that are occurring, whether it be spend or discount, and tie that back to the contract. So it's important to really grasp the concepts that businesses are truly built on these contracts, and the more control, the more understanding and development that you have of these processes, the greater opportunity you have for receiving those discounts or taking advantage of potential rebates and or driving additional revenue that you might have with enterprises that are outside of this. Continuing on, if we look at the life cycle then of contract management solutions, or the actual contract life cycle, we're going to talk in a few minutes here about how the discovery aspect is the feeder to contract management solutions, because again, if you look inside your organization and ask yourself the question, where are my contracts, you're going to find a lot of interesting answers. They're going to be on sales reps' laptops. They're going to be in back-end content management systems. They're going to be on thumb drives. And to be able to get access and find all that is not an easy task. And we're going to discuss today how there's an easier way, a better way, if you will, a solution that allows you to keep track of these and manage this in a very formulaic or systematic approach. But if we're looking at then, once the information is inside the system, it's just not about a repository. It's not about just managing the contract or putting the contract inside of a system and being able to go pull it up at some point or another. It's truly understanding that when a contract request happens and authoring occurs, that there are elements, 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 different elements of that contract, clauses that could be changing, that you need to know what's happening during that process. Even during the negotiation phase, keeping track of the versions that are out there. Attaining the approvals for these contracts can be an arduous arduous process. In fact, I was recently on a meeting with a large retail company where they literally had hundreds of thousands of contracts that were spread around the organization and not able to take the discounts or the opportunities that they might have by tracking that. And of course, from an execution standpoint, being able to create the contract, being to keep everybody in the loop, being able to have triggers that notify you when there are date changes or content changes or clause changes, and maybe there are clauses that affect hundreds of contracts, and being able to do that in a single fashion versus having to go to each one of those. All the way through obligations, as we discussed, and being able to make sure you're getting the most out of that relationship. And of course, amendments happen all the time, right? We always are looking at a contract. There are always things changing, price changes, amendments, clauses, legal aspects, certifications that might be a need to adhere to, are all aspects around this. And of course, having the proper audits in place and reporting in place from the legal side, that in case you run into litigation or you run into potential risk in the marketplace. So the net of all this is really being able to manage the risk inside your organization and making sure that you have your arms around the contracts and where they are and know where the information is held. And then being able to drive that additional revenue that a contract may allow you to if upheld, and of course the discounts that might be available to you and tracking that back to the contract. And then of course there's the renewal, right? And starting way ahead of time on that renewal to make sure that you're getting the proper attention that you need. And if you're a vendor selling anything from steel to software to widgets, you want to make sure you're well ahead of that renewal. And again, counting on potentially an account manager or a system that is not linked to the whole life cycle, your chances there can often, these chances can be missed to gain this opportunity around discounts and or revenue. So again, it's important to understand the life cycle of the contract as much as it is the ecosystem of the functions and the opportunity that exists amongst these functions and around the contract environment. If we look at now from a solutions perspective and talk about a little bit about discovery and best practices, one of the things that come with a systematic approach is what other organizations have done. And oftentimes when the contract management comes up or the opportunity to get our arms around contract management, especially in large enterprises and mid-sized organizations, that there's that first arduous task of, well, how do we get our arms around it? And again, Lloyd's going to talk about the discovery aspects of this. But then it's actually applying best practices to these contracts. What is the workflow? What is the process? What needs to occur? What are the elements of change that need to be tracked and input throughout the process so that when a new opportunity comes up or a new product is being purchased by the strategic sourcing group, that you understand the most recent updates in the contract or clauses that need to be amended. And then, of course, being able to implement a process by leveraging these best practices. So I guess you're not alone out there. There are many organizations, and we'll talk about a few of them in a second, that have embarked upon this process that organizations have been able to learn these best practices around sales, around procurement, around IT, and or legal. So grasping this information and then applying the optimization opportunity, configuring it specifically to meet the needs of the end users, because each group might be slightly different, and the systems that you use to be able to manage contract need to be adaptable and configurable to those environments. And then, of course, having a broad set of functionality that meets the end users. Not every organization needs the full depth and breadth of a contract management solution, but in fact, they may need certain things that just manage their organizations, and being able to template that or apply best practices for that area is absolutely critical. If we look at a few of the leading brands that are using contract management solutions, you'll note these are all mostly very well-named organizations, companies like Huntsman and MSNBC and AstraZeneca in the pharma world, Prudential in the insurance world. There really isn't a specific area or vertical that you can point to here because the problem exists. And as you grow your organization, the best thing to do is obviously to start sooner than later, to start grasping the concepts of building the contracts and having all of that control over them, but again, being able to pull those legacy documents in or legacy contracts in when necessary is important. And organizations such as these are well down the path of understanding this concept, and again, these best practices are gleaned from these types of companies. And you can see that you're not alone in the marketplace, that it's not just your organization that might be interested or struggling with their current processes around contracts, that other organizations have taken the leap to move to this environment. One quick look at an organization that had this challenge is Mantech. And Mantech had a very labor-intensive manual process that required multiple layers of subcontractors and team agreements and opportunity to look out to these different companies just wasn't there in the manual process. And there was difficulty in assessing these contracts and the internal conflict that occur, not to mention pricing concerns, because you may have one layer or multiple layers with subcontract. And in this particular case, using the lifecycle management system as part of our overall contract management solutions, they were able to standardize in terms of starting at the very beginning, starting at the involvement of the relationship with an RFP, and then following through the contract, and of course the actual signature aspects as well. And things like for Mantech pricing standards were important. So these were layered in and they were locked down inside of these contracts so that they knew for sure that rogue pricing wasn't being offered, or things that didn't meet certain requirements weren't being processed throughout this environment. And of course, having the repository then, but not just a repository with metadata or file names, but having a repository of clauses, a repository of different information that drives that contract. So for instance, like the obvious ones would be contract dates, but there might be commitments, there might be obligations that were made inside of these contracts that were part of that original RFP. There might be flow-through information or terms to certain subcontractors that are different for other subcontractors. So being able to manage those clauses and the variation of those clauses is extremely important in this world. And for Mantech, this really made the difference for them in managing their organization and moving forward to be able to take advantage and optimize this life cycle inside of their own organization. So if we talk just a little bit about the discovery aspects, somewhat different than the life cycle aspects, as you know, when you create a contract, if you can start from the very beginning and you can input it into a systematic approach where you're laying out the clauses and understanding the format and understanding the evolving nature of that contract through the process, that's great, and that's where you want to be. But prior to that is that very difficult and arduous task of looking at what we have literally thousands or tens of thousands, and again in some cases millions of contracts spread throughout the world. And it could be a contract on a laptop that was passed on from one person to another, and all the data was stuck and saved in a repository somewhere, or it could be on a thumb drive or on a content management system. But understanding where these are and how you get access to them in multiple formats is very, very important. And what Lloyd's going to talk to you then is about removing these perceived barriers and improving the time to value, because if you can get access to those contracts in the legacy world and pull them into a systematic approach around contact management, you now improve that time to value and you double the opportunity for relevant deals to be now visible and conscious in your everyday world and driving this process forward. So very important that this aspect is layered in or integrated from a legacy perspective. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Lloyd Alexander from SEAL, and he'll go into a bit more depth about this process and what it means to contract management. And as well, I'd like to just take a second to talk about the integration that we have with the SEAL organization. Our product is called C Discovery, which is a piece that has been built now inside of our system. So there's one process. In working with Selectica and a systematic approach, you're able to take advantage of both these opportunities. So with that, Lloyd, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Patrick. I appreciate it. So where I'd like to begin is in discussing the importance of knowing exactly what is in your contracts from a legacy contract perspective. And I've listed two things here. that play a significant role or have a significant impact on the information within, that's buried within your contracts. If you look at the fact that at any given time, one or more one-off market events could occur, and they are occurring on a near daily basis. We're hearing about financial institutions that are suddenly running into a crisis, they're declaring bankruptcy, or they're having some event take place that has a significant ripple effect across the other banking institutions, because they're all related through contracts that have serious consequences when one of those banks runs into an issue. We've also heard a lot of the news about cyber breaches that are taking place in the retail industry and other industries that, again, are causing these companies or forcing these companies to sift through their contracts to understand exactly where their risk exposure lies across the tens of thousands of contracts that they have with notification provisions and those types of things. We see this in the healthcare industry when it comes to private information for HIPAA regulations, that type of thing. And so these companies, again, are being forced immediately to pore over their ocean of contracts to understand exactly where their risk lies within them. Something that they are gearing up towards from a regulatory reform perspective. We hear about Dodd-Frank on an ongoing basis and the implications that is going to have when the rules and regulations are ultimately rolled out. Banks and institutions are currently being held to standards, and they will be held to certain deadlines that they need to begin preparing their existing contracts for to make sure that they're actually in compliance with the regulations in Dodd-Frank. So those types of activities are occurring that are causing companies to immediately react and look within their contracts to understand their risk. And then there are common daily activities or daily corporate activities that take place within perhaps your organizations. You may be considering a merger or acquisition event that is going to require you to look at the right of assignment provisions within your existing contracts to know that you can do so, you can proceed without impacting or raising the level of risk within your organization. Something as simple as contract auto renewals. We hear this a lot in contract management. It's been around for a long time. Companies are not tracking the auto renewals within their contracts and are consequently getting hit with unwanted costs stemming from these contracts that they had previously intended to terminate. So by having a good understanding of the information within your existing contracts today, any type of information from those contracts, having access to that and being able to proactively manage it in the case of an auto renewal or react to it on a near real-time basis in the case of a one-off market event is absolutely critical to mitigating the risk that stems from these contracts. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions that exist today when it comes to contract discovery, contract migration. And the first one of these, as you can see in the top bullet, revolves around just needing my existing legacy contracts to be found and loaded into the system. And there are actually a few reasons why this is inaccurate. The first of those, if you look at a kind of the rollout of a contract lifecycle management solution, as in Selectica, what's often shown as a best practice is a phased rollout, and it typically either starts with certain contract types or certain organizations to begin that rollout or that implementation process. Well, in doing so, oftentimes only a subset of legacy contracts are actually taken into consideration as they pertain to the contract type or the organization that's going to start the implementation. It's when companies begin to adopt, Selectica across other organizations that they need to begin taking into account the legacy contracts within those other organizations, within those other contract types, and so on and so forth. And so what's required, what's needed is a solution that will facilitate the quick discovery of all of those other contract types across all of those other organizations and quickly ingest those into the Selectica contract repository, track the key metadata terms within them, and provide that same level of immediacy to your company as you begin rolling out Selectica across the enterprise. You can also take into account any what we call rogue contracts, any contracts on that one-off basis that haven't been managed through the Selectica CLM solution up front. Those do exist. I hate to say, while 90+% of contracts will be processed through Selectica, there will be those one-off contracts that aren't and need to be found and managed just as effectively as the ones that are in Selectica. And so it's important, again, to have a discovery solution at your fingertips that will go out and find those rogue contracts and bring them into the system. The last thing for this particular bullet, if you're in an organization that again is heavily into the M&A activity, perhaps you are acquiring a number of companies over an annual basis, you want a quick and efficient method to take all of the legacy contracts from the acquired company and bring those into the fold of your own company, bring those into the contract repository, and manage those as accurately and effectively as you are your own migrated legacy contracts. Looking at the second bullet here, I only need to migrate my most important contracts. Well, this is inaccurate because the minute you start limiting the contracts that you're bringing into your contract repository, you're immediately broadening your risk exposure, because every contract has some element of risk buried within it. It's imperative that you are cognizant of the risk that's in every one of those contracts if something arises that may bring that to the forefront. So, it's critical. Again, don't limit the number of contracts that you're bringing in. Oftentimes, companies are forced to because there isn't a quick, efficient way to bring all of the contracts in. But with the Selectica C-Discovery solution, it is that efficient, it is that quick to go out and find all of your legacy contracts, identify the key metadata within those, and have those available in the event that you need them. Looking at the third bullet, I only need to track a few basic terms for my legacy contracts. This kind of dovetails from the previous bullet, where unfortunately it's more so that they are forced to limit the number of terms because of time and effort purposes. But again, by leveraging a contract C-Discovery solution, that goes away, because it's an automated process to identify which terms you want to have extracted from the contracts. It's an automated process to actually go out and locate the contracts across your enterprise, bring them in, and have them available within Selectica's contract repository for your immediate searching and reporting purposes. When you think about the visibility of terms in the contract, it's important to know that or I should say, one of the biggest problems that I've seen historically is that companies were forced to define up front which terms they wanted to be included in the initial migration process, with no realistic way of going back and either changing or adding to those metadata terms later on. As any company embarks on a CLM implementation or rollout, they typically only know about 30 to 40% of the terms that are really going to be important to them on a downstream basis. So what they end up with oftentimes is a contract repository that doesn't track all of the key metadata terms that they're going to want to on an ongoing basis. Now, I know within Selectica's solution, there is a great deal of flexibility to add fields and make the necessary modifications. But by leveraging the C-Discovery solution, this will assist in that process by going into the bank of legacy contracts, updating any of the metadata terms that are being extracted and applied to the relevant contract terms or contract records within Selectica's contract repository. Lastly, contract migration is a one-time process. I talked a little bit about this in the beginning, in the sense that it really is an ongoing process. it's not just a step in your initial implementation, because no matter how hard you try up front to capture all of your contracts, there are going to be a number of contracts either in organizations that haven't adopted the CLM solution yet, or there are going to be contracts that you find in other systems that you're going to want to bring in. So it really is an ongoing iterative process in terms of going out and finding legacy contracts to make sure you have a comprehensive contract repository full of the information that you want to track within it. So the problem today, well, we see, the same overall problems across many organizations when it comes to legacy contracts. To begin with, no one truly knows how many legacy contracts exist or where they're located, and so trying to just get your arms around that perspective usually, takes a large number of people, large number of time to, or I should say, a great amount of time to actually perform that search and retrieve process, okay? And to take this one step further, once you've found what you believe to be all of your contracts, no one really ever has a basic understanding of the terms buried within those contracts. So even though you have them at your fingertips, there's still significant potential risk buried within the terms of the contract that you will want to have quick access to should the occasion arise. So the big challenge with contracts, what we're seeing, is that there are a number of sizable challenges that companies face with their legacy contracts today. Companies are implementing a number of systems across their enterprise, based on the organizations that are involved. Because each of these organizations have different priorities when it comes to the type of information they want to track from a contract. So finance is focused on certain revenue terms within the contract. Procurement is looking at cost and cost savings, that type of thing. Legal is focused on indemnification, limitation of liability, and more so the legal terms. And so they're focusing their systems on the type of information that's important to them, and the end result is a series of disparate systems that typically contain only fragments of contract information and not one single source to gain that complete understanding of the terms within every contract. So by leveraging the Selectica Contract Lifecycle Management solution along with the C-Discovery capabilities, all of that information across these disparate systems, all of the contracts that are being managed perhaps on this disparate way, can be consolidated all within Selectica's contract repository using that C-Discovery solution to go and find the information, consolidate them in one central location, and have them still available to all of the key stakeholders across all of the organizations for a comprehensive view contract information, but more importantly, the risk associated to that information as well. One other note on this, one of the things once this initial challenge of consolidating the information and being able to find it, once that has been achieved, the next challenge becomes, how do we make sure that the information stays within the contract repository, stays current and up to date with the latest contract information. And this goes back to what I was talking about regarding rogue contracts. Just again making sure that any contracts that are created and managed outside of the Selectica solution, that those are quickly identified, brought into the contract repository, and the important, or I should say the critical terms, extracted to be managed and available to those stakeholders, again on a real-time basis. So as you're as you're either considering a CLM deployment, or you already have Selectica, within your enterprise, there are a number of things to consider, as it pertains to your legacy contracts. Okay, so first of all, how are you going to track down all of your legacy contracts? Do you know where they all exist? How many are there? Where are they stored? How are you going to migrate these legacy contracts into the Selectica contract repository? And then, to the last bullet here, again, how are you going to ensure that all contracts, regardless of where they're stored, will be diligently and consistently brought into the contract repository, and managed accordingly? Okay. The value of the contract management solution can again only be achieved if the organization has accurate and complete information. So really taking these bullets into account are critical as you think about the entire life cycle of the contract. Okay, the value brought to the table by the Selectica contract management solution doesn't start just with contract creation and end with the expiration or renewal. It really goes deeper than that. It almost makes it three-dimensional in that there's a depth of contracts as well as when you start to consider your legacy contracts and the information and risk buried within those. So yes, you need to think about how contracts are managed from a lifecycle perspective, but you also need to take into account the existing array of contracts that you have across your enterprise and the existing risk that lies within those as well, and make sure that you have a firm grasp and a firm understanding of that risk and what it could entail. So focusing now on the contract discovery process and the overall solution, we've talked a bit about the challenges. I really want to look at it from a best practices approach at this point. Okay, so the C-Discovery platform really helps the organization by doing exactly what it sounds like. It goes out and it looks across all of your disparate systems across your enterprise and looks for anything that is a contractual document. Okay, and it will crawl across your repositories, your shared drives, regardless of image type or document type. It will find these documents, and that's important because, again, as I've talked about, each organization can be storing their contracts in any type of system. So it's important to really look across everything and make sure you pull them in. Okay, so the C-Discovery solution goes out and it finds all of these contracts. It can discern between a contract and a non-contract, and it will put those documents, or excuse me, those contracts through an OCR process, which will immediately create a searchable PDF. Okay. Now, people ask about the quality of the OCR process. The C-Discovery solution will actually go so far as to provide you with a score on the quality of each of the OCRs, so that if it is a poor quality scan, you can have someone go in and review it just to make sure that all of the information is captured. So once you've gone out and you've found, as a part of this discovery process, the C-Discovery solution will actually extract 52 out-of-the-box pieces of contract metadata. Now, when we talk about contract metadata, we're actually talking about both the business terms as well as the legal terms. So that includes things like the limitation of liability and indemnification, but also the commercial terms, start date, end date, contract value, those types of things. And you can build on to those 52 out-of-the-box pieces of metadata to tailor it to your specific needs. Okay, so you'll have a very comprehensive set of metadata at your fingertips once you've completed this contract discovery process. So the C-Discovery solution also acts as a review platform, for quality assurance purposes, and it's critical to go through this review process because you want to make sure that the information that is captured is accurate in the way that you want it extracted from the documents, and so you'll have people that will perform this review and ensure that quality. Okay, so one example that we typically use is start date information. You could have a number of dates located within within a legacy contract, someone simply needs to go in and perhaps verify that it is the start date as opposed to some other date. But once that review has been performed once, the system learns from that, and any contract it finds will be managed and reviewed in the same way. Okay? So once that information has been reviewed, the C-Discovery solution can then push the contracts, the images of the contracts, and the metadata that's been extracted. It can actually then push that into your Selectica contract repository, populating the contract records with the pertinent or I should say relevant metadata, and have that available as a part of a larger reporting data set. Okay, we're seeing a lot of organizations prioritizing data analytics, and so what this does is it really serves up the information, the metadata from these contracts to drive this powerful downstream analytic capability. Now, I'm not going to talk about the contract analytics side of our solution, except to say that once you have this metadata at your fingertips, you can then begin to apply contract analytics and the rules that you wish to leverage within your own organization to quickly analyze things like risk and other elements of contract that could affect your daily contracting activity and really the overall health of your company when it comes to risk and contract information. So other things to consider. As you again, either you are considering a contract management initiative, you've perhaps started to put the steps in place to create a new project around here. There are a series of questions that you need to start considering to ensure that this initiative is ultimately successful and comprehensive in terms of finding all of the information you're looking for. So these are just a series of questions that range from very simple to certainly more complex. But even the simple ones, are sometimes incredibly difficult to answer. Just going back to that initial one, where are my contracts? How many do I have? Okay, these you may think that you ultimately have a good handle on where all of these are, but oftentimes there are still a number that are uncovered. But at least by taking these questions into consideration, you can begin to start the process of locating them, getting other stakeholders within your own organization and other organizations to begin looking for these legacy contracts and or at least know where they are, so that the C-Discovery solution can facilitate the migration into Selectica's contract repository. You also need to consider the condition of these legacy contracts, whether they're in electronic format or paper format, and then lastly, give consideration to what metadata you consider to be critical in terms of extraction and population into the contract record within Selectica. Okay, so those are just some of the things to consider, and we have teams that are extremely that have very much a great deal of experience, in assisting clients in this whole process. Delivering a methodology that is comprehensive in answering these types of questions, or helping you to answer these questions in a methodical way, and making sure that these projects are successful. So achieving success, to recap again, contract migration, the contract discovery process, it's not just a one-time loading of a subset of contracts with a handful of basic terms. It really is a crucial process or a critical process that is ongoing, okay, and it really delivers that comprehensive insight into all of your contracts whenever you need that information, okay. Again, thinking about those ad hoc market events that could happen, or the daily corporate activities that take place where you need access to your contracts and the contract information. By going through a contract discovery and migration process, you'll have that valuable information at your fingertips through the Selectica solution, where you can begin leveraging it to make real-time decisions. In the end, based on that, in the end, a successful contract migration, delivers that complete and accurate contract repository within Selectica that you can have confidence in making decisions based on the information within it. Okay. So looking at one particular case study, I wanted to highlight the project that we have at Thomson Reuters. Most people are familiar with Thomson Reuters. They had a number of disparate systems that contained frankly millions of documents. What they wanted to do was leverage their Salesforce platform to consolidate the contract information, or I should say the contracts as well as the information buried within them, into their Salesforce system, so that it was readily available to the key stakeholders, within Thomson Reuters. And so you can see here, well, just to mention some of the metrics around this. Once the project was completed, we had actually processed over 2 million documents from across 5 different systems. 2 million documents from which we were able to find 600. It was between 600 to 700,000 contracts. We were able to isolate those, extract the metadata from those contracts, and ultimately load those contracts and the metadata into the Salesforce solution. Okay, so this was processed, and they had at the end of that project a central repository within Salesforce.com of these contracts and the relevant contract information. Okay. This is not an uncommon set of metrics. Companies, if you look across entire organizations, or I should say across enterprises involving all organizations, the number of documents that could exist out there can easily climb into the millions, where perhaps 20, 30, 40% of those represent contracts, subcontracts, amendments, anything that you want to be extracted and represented as a contract within your contract repository. Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much, Lloyd and Patrick. We've received a lot of questions, but before we get into that, just to kind of summarize some key takeaways, what to do tomorrow based on what we've covered so far is, one, share insights from this webinar with general counsel, procurement, human resources, IT, and sales colleagues, those folks that are concerned with contract management in general, and ask them, how are they managing paper versus electronic contracts? I think that's a really big distinction here. And one way to look at this, too, is once you have your cross-functional resources identified, who would best benefit from having this kind of conversation, organize a contract discovery task force to create a cross-functional plan for assessing compliance risks and revenue opportunities. And we're going to go ahead and continue moving on here with some additional resources. Actually, before we do that, we're going to get into the Q&A. And again, we've received a fair amount of questions so far from the WebEx chat. Thank you very much for that. If we don't answer all of your questions online here, and we are running out of time, we've got about 10 minutes to go, we will certainly follow up after the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pass this back and forth to Patrick and Lloyd with a number of different questions here, just scanning the chat. Let's see here. So starting at the top, Patrick, when you were discussing the trends from Gartner earlier around the $24 billion of savings, what does that really mean?
Sure. The biggest piece there is the opportunity that's left on the table when contracts are not adhered to or not compared against the actual results with that vendor and or customer, depending if it's a sales or a procurement contract. On the procurement side, often discounts are promised by vendors, and if not taking the contract and comparing it directly to the actual spend of those vendors throughout the process, one never really knows if they're getting the proper discounts or not. And oftentimes this falls on the procurement person to be able to track that contract. Well, you can imagine if you have thousands of contracts that offer discounts based on spend, that you might never be able to realize those. So having an automated process to do that is what Gartner is suggesting will allow you to make sure that the spend is managed against the actual contract commitment. And the same goes from a sales contract to a vendor or to a customer, that if, if a certain amount of product is supposed to be used to get certain discounts, if those discounts are not observed, then they perhaps can charge more, or maybe you're not charging enough from the standpoint of the types of products that you're selling, whether it be steel or software as a service. It really doesn't matter. So again, the biggest piece there on that $24 billion is just dollars that are left on the table for not taking advantage of specific obligations, commitments, rebates, or discounts.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you for that. Pat, Lloyd, we have a question for you. What is the skill level needed to create rules under your contract analytics product?
Oh, great question. So no, the answer is no. There are no special technical skills required or needed. All configuration is done within the system, which so clients typically will designate one, two, or a handful of business stakeholders that they would consider to be the system experts. They'll receive training on the solution when it comes to configuration. But no, all of that's done through the system. No special technical skills are required.
Okay, thanks for that. Another one here for you, Patrick. On one of the slides that you covered how enterprise legal management, strategic sourcing, CRM, other various cross-functional teams. Can you elaborate more a bit on the connection between those departments?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're looking at the contract or the information that resides, more importantly, the information that resides inside of the contract, there is a interrelationship between legal, strategic sourcing, partners, or sales. And it's important that an organization recognizes that a customer can also be a partner, a customer can also be a vendor. And having a collaborative approach inside of a contract management organization allows the organization that manages that relationship at a high level to know what's happening across the organization. And certainly the general counsel is often in the middle of negotiating these contracts, but certainly doesn't have the bandwidth to go back and see, are we getting what we're supposed to get from each of these different contracts. So having a systematic approach that links the different departments together, so they know when they pull up a certain customer or vendor, they can see all of the contracts that are related to that particular vendor and look at the opportunities that might be there. And sales, for instance, if you're selling, wouldn't it be great to know that your procurement department is spending X dollars with that vendor? So when you get to the negotiation aspects of your contract, there's potentially some leverage there from a back and forth perspective. So again, the interrelationship between the departments is critical in managing contracts, and almost impossible without a systematic approach.
Sounds good. We're getting more questions, and thank you for that. And again, please send questions if we're not able to address those, and we won't be able to because there's quite a few. We will certainly follow up. But here's one for you, Lloyd. I think, how quickly can the contract discovery software review the contracts that it finds, and various formats, of course?
Sure. So, conservatively speaking, we say that the C-Discovery solution can process approximately 5,000 contracts per day. We've done more than that based on client need, but it's a good ballpark to estimate about 5,000 contracts per day.
Okay, enough to keep you busy. Okay, so here's a question around deployment. Maybe, Patrick, you can address this. The different ways this can be deployed, whether it's SaaS, cloud. Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, primarily we're a SaaS organization. In fact, we have moved from an on-premise company over the last few years to a SaaS environment. And that's important to know, because when you start looking at the integration of other systems and the usability from whether it's SAP or Oracle or Salesforce.com, we offer the APIs or the application protocol interfaces that allow the organization to be able to have direct linkage and interface with these organizations. So yeah, we offer very broad sets. Some are pre-built like Salesforce.com. Others are a format that we'll follow. But yes, we're very open environment and very much can integrate with those back-end procurement systems, financial systems, ERP systems, CRM, or whatever the case may be.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. Can the CLM software email notification action items be, directly to a contract manager or responsible party? In other words, if something's happening around contracts, what's the notification look like?
Yeah, we have triggers built. So if you own a contract, or even if you own a clause, there's ways that we can manage this so that triggers are enabled or established, so it notifies the person if something has happened during the process, or if dates are coming up, or if discounts are achieved in an obligation management environment. So absolutely.
Okay, and we also received a question here about actually the presentation deck. So just to clarify, this is being recorded for on demand, so you'll have that access within 24 to 48 hours. And we'll probably move, if not all the content, some of the content from the PowerPoint into a slide share type of content, so that will be available to you. Okay, just scanning some additional questions, and I think this will probably be the last question. We covered briefly some of the industries that, from the various customer success stories. Can either of you just talk about where perhaps the verticals that are taking this on more seriously or adopting these types of capabilities, and where the opportunities lie?
Lloyd, you want to grab it first, or?
Sure. So from a contract discovery and migration perspective, we're seeing a great deal of interest in the financial services industry, for example. Contracts, with again all of the the issues that are happening, both from a negative perspective, unfortunately, but also to the regulatory reform. Banks are extremely sensitive to knowing where their contracts are and the terms that are buried within them. So financial services, certainly, we're seeing the healthcare industry start to look at this very closely, as private information is critical. And then, the last one I would put out there at the moment is the high-tech industry. We're seeing a significant spike in interest in high-tech.
Yeah, and I would echo those three as well. High tech, certainly, because of the relationships from the tech vendors and what they have, other sub-relationships with integration and things like that, partners and so on. High tech has a tremendous amount of activity there. As well, financial services, companies like Prudential, for instance, who uses this technology across the board, many layers of contracts and agreements and information down to the consumer level, all the way up to financial agreements and so on. And then, of course, in the healthcare world, working whether you're a drug company or whether you're a health services organization, contracts are very heavy. And those are three. But keep in mind, again, it's certainly the vertical industry. There are those that are migrating faster from the vertical industry perspective. However, when you have a complex environment and you have a lot of contracts, there really isn't one particular industry that has a bigger problem than the other. Most industries, especially when you get to mid-size and larger organizations that have contracts, all have similar business problems.
Okay. Well, we're going to part here with some more resources. We highly recommend you subscribe to and share our social contracting blog to receive updates from various subject matter experts, thought leaders, best practices, you name it, we've got it. We're actually adding more contributors to the blog, so we welcome additional contributors. We're going to actually be at the 26th Annual General Counsel Conference in New York on June 4th and 5th. with a couple of different presenters and general counsels that will be helping us with a couple of great sessions. So we look forward to you participating in that if you're available. And then if you haven't visited our website, please do. There's lots of great resources available that you can download, and highly recommend you request a demo if you haven't seen the product up close. And with that, I just want to extend our thanks from the team here, the webinar team. Thanks to you, gentlemen, Patrick and Lloyd, for the webinar here. And like I said earlier, we will have this on demand for distribution very shortly, and have a wonderful day.